October 14, 1943. At 25,000 feet above Germany, the sky seems still, but inside the tail of a B-17, everything shakes. Staff Sergeant Michael Romano, curled up in the cramped space reserved for the tail gunner, feels the bones in his arms protest as he grips the two heavy .50 caliber machine guns, arms that seem made for a man larger than him. Before his eyes there's only a small plexiglass bubble through which he sees a Focke-Wulf 190, gliding with deadly calm into the perfect position to strike. 6 o'clock low, the exact point where a bomber is most vulnerable. Romano focuses on his ring and beat sight. It's such a rudimentary aiming system that it feels like an artifact, two simple metal bars that must align with the target. No compensation for the speed of the two aircraft, no automatic calculation for wind drift, no help as the two planes tear through the sky at over 500 miles per hour combined. Pulling the trigger, Romano feels the familiar vibration of his machine guns. But the fire goes wide of the enemy fighter. The tracer rounds streak through the air, missing both flesh and metal. The Focke-Wulf returns fire, short, cold flashes. The 20mm rounds hit the B-17 as if the aluminum were just a fragile shell, nothing stronger than paper. And this is not an isolated scene. Today, it repeats hundreds of times. It's the second raid on Schweinfurt, 291 Flying Fortress bombers launched into the heart of Germany, without fighter escorts. When the sun sets, 60 bombers will have crashed, more than one-fifth of the entire force. Another 138 will return to base so riddled with holes that they can never fly again. 600 American aviators will not return. The numbers are clear. With these losses, completing the 25 required missions is no longer a statistic, it's an illusion. The post-mission debrief reveals what no one really wanted to face: the tail gunners, the ones who were supposed to protect the plane from the angle favored by German pilots, failed to achieve more than an 8% accuracy rate. Luftwaffe fighters only need to appear from behind, endure a few seconds of inaccurate fire, and then systematically destroy an expensive American strategic campaign. One flying fortress after another. At High Wycombe, in the headquarters of the 8th Air Force, senior commanders gather around tables cluttered with maps and reports. The concept that gave the B-17 its name, a flying fortress, capable of defending itself with a dense network of machine guns, suddenly appears for what it is, an unfulfilled promise. Without a radical change, daylight precision bombing risks being wiped out from the war. What the officers cannot imagine is that, at the same moment, in Bassingbourn, a 22-year-old tail gunner is scribbling an unthinkable idea in his logbook. A project that violates regulations, which the engineers will dismiss as unfeasible, as a youthful mistake. Yet that idea will triple the accuracy of tail gunners and save thousands of American aviators. This is the story of the invention they tried to suffocate, and the young man who refused to let it die. But to understand why Romano's insight was so groundbreaking, we must return to the problem from which it all began. The B-17 had been conceived following a philosophy inherited from naval warfare: fill it with guns, create overlapping fields of fire, turn it into a battleship of the sky. Official documents presented it as a battleship of the air. The reality, in combat, dismantled that illusion with brutal efficiency. August 1943. Young Michael Romano sets foot for the first time on Bassingbourn Airfield, England, assigned as a replacement tail gunner to the 91st Bomb Group. A former Pittsburgh factory worker, just 19 when he enlisted, with no college education or technical background, he brings with him only courage and a hand already trained by manual labor. The Army gives him 6 weeks of intense training, learning to clear gun jams, estimate target distances, and above all, hope that the rounds he fires don't simply vanish into the air. His office is a tail compartment that looks more like a coffin than a combat station. Romano must kneel on a tiny bicycle-style saddle, his feet braced against the aircraft's frame, while operating 2 heavy .50 caliber Browning M2s mounted on a limited support. The gun sight is rudimentary, just a small ring and bead setup, no more sophisticated than a Wild West rifle. Every enemy fighter attack becomes a snapshot of impossible calculations, estimating the relative speed of the aircraft, leading the target's trajectory, compensating for bullet drop, all while wearing thick gloves at -40 degrees, trying to pull the trigger before German cannons can open fire. In training, under safe conditions, even the best shooters rarely hit more than 12% of their targets. In combat, under pressure, low on oxygen, with their hearts pounding, actual accuracy drops to 6 to 8%. The Luftwaffe recognizes the opportunity immediately. German fighters refine their tactics to exploit the weakness of the tail. Attacks from below, from the dead 6 o'clock angle, endure 15 to 20 seconds of inaccurate gunfire, then close to roughly 200 yards before unleashing deadly 20mm rounds. German reports describe the B-17's tail position as moderately dangerous, an obstacle insufficient to deter an attack. The price is paid at once. On August 17, during the first Schweinfurt raid, 60 bombers are shot down. On October 8 over Bremen, 30 more. 2 days later, another 30 over Münster. The 8th Air Force is losing aircraft faster than factories can replace them. In Washington, General Henry Hap Arnold studies the reports and questions whether daylight bombing can remain sustainable. Meanwhile, engineers search for solutions: stronger turrets, heavier calibers, motorized systems. In Cheyenne, Boeing begins designing a more advanced tail turret, but its implementation stretches into 1944. Some prototypes require removing the entire tail section, an impossible modification for bombers already deployed in England. And so, day after day, men keep dying. On August 19, 1943, Michael Romano flies his first combat mission over the Gilsrijen airfield in the Netherlands. 3 FW-190s attack his bomber. Romano fires 480 rounds, convinced he has hit at least one fighter. Only later, reviewing the onboard camera footage, does he discover that every tracer passed harmlessly in front of the enemy. 2 bombers in his formation do not survive the assault. After his third mission, Romano stays on the hard stand even after the rest of the crew has already left the aircraft. He remains there, motionless, staring at his still warm machine guns. His hands tremble not from fear, he has learned to manage that, but from the physical strain of the task, handling weapons weighing over 80 pounds for endless minutes, kneeling, while the freezing high-altitude air numbs his muscles. That evening, in the quiet of the barracks, he sketches the first outlines of his idea. He suddenly realizes the problem is not the Brownings, nor the mount that holds them. It's the very way tail gunners are forced to fight. They shoot without any real reference, chasing targets that streak through slices of sky they cannot control. They aim at points in space they cannot accurately predict. What he lacks, and what the Army Air Forces never bothered to give him, is a way to know, before pulling the trigger, where his rounds will go. He needs a reflector sight. A reliable visual guide, something that anticipates the tracer's trajectory. But in the cramped tail of a B-17, installing a standard sight is impossible. Unless someone dares to break the rules. According to military bureaucracy, Michael Romano is not the kind of person destined to revolutionize a weapons system. He has no titles or advanced studies. Born in Pittsburgh in 1924, he leaves school at 16 to work in steel mills when his father becomes ill. There he learns to run blast furnaces, repair machinery, and understand metals, not from manuals, but through the brutal method of fail and learn. When the United States enters the war, Romano enlists dreaming of finally leaving the factory behind. The Army Air Forces instead sends him to aerial gunnery school, not because of merit, but because of his build. He is small enough to squeeze into that metal tomb at the end of the fuselage. At 5 feet 7 and 145 pounds, he can fit into spaces others couldn't even enter. In Harlingen, Texas, he completes training with unremarkable results, good trigger control, acceptable maintenance skills, nothing to distinguish him from the mass of recruits. He receives his silver wings because someone has to be in the bomber's tail, not because he excels. And yet there is something the instructor's evaluations don't mention. Romano cannot tolerate equipment that doesn't work. After his 5th mission, on October 4, 1943, that intolerance reaches a breaking point. His B-17 returns to base with 78 flak holes scattered across the fuselage and the marks of 2 frontal fighter attacks. Romano has fired 620 rounds without hitting anything. His best friend, a tail gunner on another bomber in the formation, dies when a Bf-109 dives in from behind, and Romano's covering fire isn't enough to deter it. That night, instead of going to sleep, he grabs a maintenance flashlight, his logbook, and heads for the hangar. He climbs into the tail, still saturated with the smell of cordite and hydraulic fluid. He examines the simple ring sight, incapable of giving him a real view of what's happening outside. Then, in a random detail, he finds his answer. In the curved plexiglass of the tail he sees his own reflection. In that warped surface he can glimpse portions of sky his gun sight will never allow him to control, blind angles that, if he could exploit them, would give him a huge advantage. Romano grabs a pencil and starts drawing. What if he mounted a series of small mirrors, precisely angled, capable of giving him a wider peripheral view? What if he could watch the tracer's path through those reflections, correcting his fire in real time instead of relying on a gun sight designed for a rifle, not for the chaos of an air attack? That night, in the dim light of the hangar, the idea begins to take shape. The decisive step comes almost by accident, as Romano rereads his sketches with heavy eyelids and a mind racing faster than his hands. The question forms in his head with the simplicity of an obvious insight: what if the mirrors alone weren't enough? What if he combined them with a small reflector sight, just a tiny glass plate etched with a reticle, placed exactly where his eyes naturally align with the Browning's? That way he could track incoming fighters and, at the same time, use the side mirrors to see how the bursts he spits from the tail of the B-17 behave. It wouldn't be anything like the sophisticated gyroscopic sights installed on American fighters. It would be an improvised hybrid, reflective surfaces, reference marks, no complex mechanisms. A crude solution, but not an impossible one. That night he spends 3 hours with the carpenter's protractor he borrowed from the workshop, measuring angles, imagining trajectories, studying how to combine sight lines and fields of view within an already tiny space. By the time dawn begins to brighten the sky, Romano has a complete design in front of him, a reflector-based aiming system supported by mirrors, requiring no electrical power, easy to install, and buildable from common materials. And he also has a massive obstacle. What he has designed openly violates Technical Order 0120G2, which forbids any unauthorized modification to the defensive weapons of bombers. Installing it without permission means exposing himself to a formal charge, perhaps even a court-martial. Romano, however, has already decided. He would rather risk the punishment than continue firing blind while the men around him die. His ally appears where he least expects it, in the sheet metal shop. Technical Sergeant Frank Kellerman, just shy of 40, a mechanic from Detroit, had spent the years of the Depression in the Civilian Conservation Corps building bridges, improvising repairs with whatever materials were at hand, reinventing solutions because no one ever provided him with proper tools. On October 7th, Romano hands him the bundle of sketches with a request that is clearly outside regulations. Kellerman studies the project in silence, then says without emphasis, "This is illegal." Romano nods without hesitation. "You're asking me to modify defensive armaments without approval. You know that, right?" "Yes, Sergeant." Kellerman finally looks up. "When's your next mission?" "Tomorrow." "Munster. Then I hope you have no plans tonight." They begin work after midnight, in a corner of the hangar where nobody asks too many questions. Kellerman gathers materials that aren't in the inventory. Curved mirrors taken from out-of-service navigation instruments, plexiglass panels from damaged canopies, aluminum brackets scavenged from abandoned airframes cannibalized for spare parts. The heart of the system, the small reflector sight, is a stroke of luck that makes the project possible. They disassemble it from a destroyed P-47 Thunderbolt, still intact enough to be repurposed. Kellerman modifies the mounting brackets and redesigns the attachments so the device can fit into the cramped tail of the B-17. Paradoxically, the mirrors are the most complicated part. Romano wants them convex, 3 in total, each angled with millimeter precision to give him a peripheral view of tracer paths without obstructing his direct line of sight outside. Kellerman builds adjustable mounts using bent aluminum and tiny ball joints salvaged from flight control mechanisms. They spend the entire night adjusting, testing, correcting, and checking each sight line in turn. By 4:30 a.m., the assembly is installed in the knockout dropper, the B-17G assigned to Romano. The setup is crude, almost artisanal, brackets secured with generic Air Force bolts, mirrors fastened with safety wire, and the reflector sight welded to the Browning structure with a bracket that would make any Boeing engineer shudder. And, of course, none of this appears in the official records. The maintenance log remains spotless, as if the tail of the knockout dropper did not harbor a small act of disobedience destined to change everything. At the dawn briefing, Romano remains silent. He sits at the back of the room, shoulders straight, hands clasped on the table. The new handmade sight he spent the night constructing weighs on him like a hot secret, still pulsing with tension. He doesn't mention it to anyone. Not to his pilot, Lieutenant James Holbrook, who doesn't even think to glance at the B-17's tail before takeoff. Not to the group commander. Not to the armaments officer. No one must know until he has seen with his own eyes whether this gamble really works. At 7:30 a.m., the knockout dropper leaves the runway and climbs toward the sky, hardening into blue. Above Germany, at 10:15, the calm shatters. A Bf-109 drops down from the blind spot, low 6 o'clock, speed rising, a sharp shadow already tightening its attack run. Romano swings the gun mount, pushes himself into the new sight. The reticle floats, almost suspended in the void, alive and bright. At the edges of his vision, the tiny reflective surfaces reveal the true orientation of the barrels. For the first time, he can see both the target and the behavior of his own bursts at the same time. He squeezes the trigger for a 3-second burst. In the mirrors he sees the mistake instantly. He's firing too far behind. He corrects, leads the fighter just enough, the width of the reticle, and fires again. The second burst locks onto the enemy's fate. The Bf-109's engine ignites, a brutal flash, and the aircraft flips onto one wing, spiraling down in a spin, wrapped in a column of black smoke. Within seconds, nothing remains but a dark echo in the sky. Romano stays still, breathing hard into the oxygen mask. He looks at the guns, then the mirrors, then the emptied horizon. "Holy!" he whispers. "It worked. It really worked." They land at 13:40. Confirmation of his first victory arrives quickly, along with a handshake, a couple of pats on the back, and a few bright smiles. For 20 minutes, Romano is a hero. At 1400 hours, everything collapses. During the post-flight inspection, Master Sergeant Donald Pierce notices the modifications in the tail immediately. There is no room for ambiguity, mirrors, non-standard brackets, a sight. Wherever you look, it's a blatant violation of regulations. Pierce calls the squadron ordnance officer at once, Captain Richard Voss. When Voss arrives, clipboard in hand and his lips drawn into a cold fury, the fate of the sight already seems sealed. "Sergeant Romano," he says, pronouncing each syllable like a formal charge, "would you care to explain the unauthorized equipment installed at your gun position?" Romano snaps to attention. "Sir, I built an improved aiming system." "You did what?" Voss' voice rises sharp. "Do you have the slightest idea of the orders you've violated? The 0120G2 prohibits any modification to defensive armament without technical approval. This isn't some damn Saturday project in your garage, Sergeant. This is an operational bomber. Unauthorized modifications can compromise the structure, cause fires, interfere with other systems." Romano tries to wedge open a breach. "Sir, the system works. I shot down." "I don't care if you shot down the entire Luftwaffe." Voss roars over him, jabbing an accusing finger toward the tail. "That installation isn't Army Air Forces, it isn't Boeing, it hasn't passed a single test. Remove it immediately or I will request your court-martial for damaging government property." Lieutenant Holbrook tries to intervene, his voice calm. Captain, my tail gunner scored his first victory today thanks to that sight. Maybe we shall. Opinion noted, Lieutenant. Boss cuts him off without even looking at him. The modification will be removed. End of discussion. The news spreads through the 91st Bomb Group like an explosion. In the mess hall that evening, every gunner knows about the illegal sight and the fighter that was shot down. And everyone has an opinion. The veterans crowd around Romano's table with an almost feverish excitement. How long does it take to mount? What's your field of view? Can it handle the slipstream at 200 miles? While the technical officers and maintenance supervisors react with a mix of apprehension and growing irritation. The line is drawn, on one side, those who see a brilliant idea, on the other, those who see an unacceptable risk. And Romano, much against his will, finds himself squarely in the middle. On October 11th, Captain Theodore Morrison, Assistant Ordnance Officer of the group, calls an emergency meeting. The conference room is packed, 14 officers, many still carrying the smell of fuel and morning rain. The atmosphere is electric, not a murmur, not a smile, just the taut tension of men summoned to discuss something none of them ever wanted to face. Morrison opens the folder with a sharp snap. Gentlemen, he begins, voice rigid. We are confronted with a serious disciplinary problem. A sergeant has made unauthorized modifications to his armament, using components of unverified origin. This sets a dangerous precedent. If every man decided to redesign his own weapon according to personal criteria. He cannot finish the sentence. The room erupts in a chorus of protests. Major William Calhoun, operations officer, leaps to his feet. He is massive, his voice filling the space like a double bass. With all due respect, sir, this is absurd. Romano shot down a German fighter using the device. Not a coincidence, a result. Our tail gunners have an 8% hit rate. If that modification can improve even slightly. Slightly? Morrison interrupts, jaw tight. Major Calhoun, we have no data, no tests, no formal validation. A single success does not constitute evidence. Calhoun presses on, standing firm. Then test it. Fly Romano tomorrow with the system installed and cameras running. We'll have objective proof, not assumptions. If it doesn't work, you dismantle it. But if it does, maybe we should thank him instead of threatening court-martial for the first man who actually tries to help this group survive. The debate quickly degenerates. The engineers talk about structural integrity, vibrations, fire risk, legal liability. The operations officers respond with the growing tally of lost aircraft, with the despair of gunners firing blindly, praying to hit something. Within minutes, the discussion is no longer a discussion, it is a hurricane of overlapping voices and cross-accusations. At 2000 hours, the matter is taken to Colonel Stanley Ray, commander of the 91st Bomb Group. Ray is a man as hard as the canvas of the old World War I biplanes. 53 years old, a career spent balancing discipline and survival. When he enters the room, the energy drops to zero. He speaks little, listens much. For 90 minutes he lets everyone speak their mind, interrupting no one. Then he closes the file in front of him and lifts his gaze. How many bombers did we lose last week? Silence drops like a stone. Captain Morrison, Ray repeats, with a calm that hurts more than any shout. I asked you a question? Morrison swallows. 17, sir. 17 B-17s from our group alone. And how many enemy fighters were shot down by our tail gunners, confirmed? 3, sir. Ray nods slowly, as if weighing each number on the scales of common sense. 17 bombers down. 680 Americans. In return, 3 German fighters. He turns toward Morrison with a look sharp as a blade. Captain, your concerns about regulations are noted. They are valid. But I am far more concerned about losing 17 aircraft a week because our defensive armament is ineffective. Then he fixes his eyes on Romano, standing at the back of the room like a defendant awaiting his verdict. Sergeant, your modification will remain installed. You will fly the next 3 missions with onboard cameras active. Every engagement will be recorded. If your hit rate improves significantly, I will authorize adoption of the system throughout the group. If it does not, the equipment will be removed and you will face the appropriate disciplinary measures. Is that clear? Romano straightens, his voice firm. Yes, sir. Ray stands. Meeting adjourned. And somebody get me a set of those damn mirror diagrams immediately. And with that, the fate of Romano's improvised site officially shifts from insubordination to military experiment. If this video helped you see the story differently, click the subscribe button. We tell the stories history books missed. In our next video, the radar operator who, from a basement in Portsmouth, won the D-Day. October 12, 1943. Brimman Romano takes off for his fourth combat mission with his improvised gunsight, now officially under observation, and with cameras ready to record every frame of the engagements. The 8th Air Force has launched 236 B-17s against submarine facilities. The Luftwaffe responds with 250 interceptors. It's the kind of day where gunners count the seconds. At 11:23, as the formation skirts German territory, the first attack arrives. A Focke-Wulf 190 dives from above, at 7 o'clock. Romano locks onto it in the reflector sight. The illuminated reticle overlays the fighter, a fixed point in a world moving too fast. In the side mirrors he sees his own trajectories, instant feedback, impossible with traditional sights. He opens fire for 4 seconds. The root of the FW190's wing ignites like oil-soaked paper. The fighter veers sharply, trailing smoke. At 11:47 comes the second attack, a Bf-109 on a straight line at 6 o'clock, the classic killing run. Romano centers the reticle, checks the mirrors, corrects, and fires. The 109's canopy bursts like glass under a hammer. The aircraft flips and drops. The cameras tremble, capturing everything. When Romano lands at Bassingbourn, he brings with him 2 confirmed kills and 1 probable. Total ammunition expended, 380 rounds, under 200 per kill. Conventional gunners typically use 2,800. The technical room becomes an improvised movie theater. Captain Morrison studies each frame carefully. The tracer paths, the corrections, the mirror feedback, all data impossible to ignore. At last he exhales, sets down the projector, and murmurs. Fine. It works. But we need real technical drawings, standardized components, and installation procedures before we can consider group-wide implementation. How long? Asks Colonel Ray. At least 6 weeks. We have to coordinate with 8th Air Force Headquarters, submit. Ray cuts him off. We don't have 6 weeks. He turns toward Technical Sergeant Kellerman. How many units can you build per day? With the material we have. Kellerman thinks for a moment. With help from the sheet metal shop, 4 complete systems a day. If we salvage the gun sights from the out-of-service P-47s and fabricate the mirror brackets here, then start immediately. I want every tail gunner equipped within 2 weeks. Sir? Morrison protests. Without authorization from 8th Air Force. Captain, I'll handle 8th Air Force. You handle the technical specifications. Dismissed. What follows is anything but bureaucratic. It's a clandestine, unofficial, lightning-fast operation, an improvised production line that would make any military logistics inspector faint. Kellerman and his team unofficially scavenge every corner of Bassingbourn, gun sights from scrapped P-47s, damaged navigation mirrors, aluminum brackets from the supply depots. They assemble 4 systems a day, on rotating shifts, in a hangar that now looks more like a secret laboratory than a workshop. October 20th. 18 B-17s of the 91st Bomb Group mount Romano's system. The results are immediate and staggering. October 20th, mission to Düren. 11 kills out of 47 attacks, 23.4%, triple the previous average. November 3rd, Wilhelmshaven. 16 kills out of 68 attacks, 23.5%. November 5th, Gelsenkirchen. 13 kills, 21.8%. A statistical jump impossible to ignore. The Luftwaffe, accustomed to hammering B-17s from the rear almost with impunity, suddenly finds itself facing a precise, lethal wall of fire. German intelligence reports begin noting a new effectiveness in American tail guns. Their tactics have to change. And fast. Romano, the sergeant who had violated a technical order, has just altered the balance of the air war. Major Hans Joachim Jabs, Luftwaffe ace, writes in his diary, "The flying fortresses have become far more dangerous. Their tail gunners now show an accuracy previously seen only in powered turrets. Rear quadrant attacks are now an unacceptable risk." Word reaches 8th Air Force headquarters at High Wycombe quickly. On November 18, 1943, without warning, Brigadier General Frederick Castle arrives at Bassingbourn. He personally inspects Romano's position, reviews the footage, then calls him in for a 30-minute interview. "Sergeant, how did you know it would work?" Romano shrugs. "I didn't, sir. But the old sights didn't work, so I figured anything might be an improvement." Castle laughs, a sound no one had heard on this topic in months. "Fair point." Castle examines the mirror system and tests its movement range. "This can be produced at depot level." "Yes, sir. Sergeant Kellerman already has the technical drawings. Most components are salvaged, but we can get proper materials if needed." Castle nods, looking at Romano. "I authorize immediate implementation across the entire 4th Wing. Every B-17 will receive this modification within 30 days. Then, meeting his eyes, "Sergeant, you have probably saved more American lives than you can ever imagine." By December 1943, Romano's mirror and reflector gunsight system, officially designated Field Expedient Tailgun Aiming System, Type 1, is installed on more than 200 B-17s across several bomb groups. Engineering commissions of the 8th Air Force, together with Boeing's Cheyenne Modification Center, begin incorporating the principles of his reflector sight into their designs. The production Cheyenne turret, which begins appearing on B-17Gs in January 1944, features an N8 reflector sight positioned almost exactly where Romano had improvised his salvaged P-47 gunsight. The impact on crew survival was immediate. In groups equipped with the improved system, losses from tail attacks dropped by roughly 35% between October 1943 and March 1944. That translates to dozens of bombers and hundreds of lives saved from a modification that a single engineering captain had initially labeled illegal and dangerous. Romano continued flying combat missions until February 1944, achieving 7 confirmed kills and 4 probable, an exceptional record for a tail gunner. More importantly, his innovation spread throughout the 8th Air Force and the 15th Air Force in Italy, influencing defensive weapon modifications on B-24 Liberators as well. On February 22, 1944, during the Big Week, the maximum effort operation against German aircraft production facilities, Romano's bomber sustained heavy flak damage over Leipzig. He continued fending off enemy fighters while hydraulic fluid and fuel sprayed through the tail section. The plane made a forced landing in Belgium, and the crew survived. Romano spent the final months of the war in a German prisoner of war camp. By May 1945, when he returned to the United States, he weighed 127 pounds, 18 pounds less than at enlistment. The Army Air Forces awarded him the Distinguished Flying Cross for extraordinary valor in flight, recognizing his innovative contribution to defensive gunnery effectiveness. The citation carefully avoided mentioning that his innovation had initially been illegal. Romano never sought publicity. He refused interviews with military magazines. When Boeing engineers invited him to Seattle to discuss the Cheyenne turret development, he politely declined, saying, "I just built what I needed to survive. Other people turned it into something official." Romano returned to Pittsburgh, married his high school sweetheart, and worked as a machinist for 37 years. He rarely spoke of the war. His children grew up knowing only that their father flew bombers and fixed some gun sights. But the legacy of his improvised mirror and reflector sight system extended far beyond his personal modesty. The B-17G Cheyenne turret, incorporating the original concepts from Romano's aiming system, became an essential component in the final stages of the war. Between August 1943 and April 1945, Boeing built 8,680 B-17s, most of which were equipped with aiming systems derived directly from Romano's improvised modifications. The effect in the field was immediate. High bomber losses from tail attacks began to decline. Tail gunners, now more accurate, could finally counter German fighters effectively, forcing the Luftwaffe to revise its tactics. Pilots who had previously attacked from the rear with relative impunity were compelled to switch to frontal attacks, which were far riskier for them but necessary to evade the improved defensive fire. In 1944, U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey analysts calculated the impact of the modifications. B-17 groups equipped with improved gun sights experienced a 32 to 37% reduction in tail attack losses, saving approximately 840 bombers and 8,400 airmen. The concept Romano developed, the integration of a reflector sight with an immediate feedback system, not only influenced the design of bomber tail turrets, but also became a model for future innovations. His ideas formed the foundation for subsequent defensive weapon modifications on aircraft like the B-52 Stratofortress, where the principle of providing gunners with a clear, precise view of fire trajectories remains unchanged, albeit using far more sophisticated technologies. In 1983, during a reunion at Bassingbourn Airfield, some of the gunners who had flown with Romano's system gathered to remember those days. Gerald Hammond, one of them, still kept one of the mirror brackets he had saved from that time. Approaching Romano, now in his 60s and a little older, he said in a steady voice, "Because of you and those mirrors, I made it home. My children exist because you wouldn't accept that the gun sights were subpar." "Thank you." Romano, visibly uncomfortable, smiled and shrugged, as if to downplay it. "You would have done the same. We just wanted to come home alive. The rest was just a way to make it happen." Yet in those words was a truth that Romano hadn't fully recognized. He was the only one who refused to settle for the solutions available. While so many others adapted to the necessity of fighting with what they had, Romano had the courage to break the rules and take enormous risks in search of a way that would save hundreds of lives. One man alone dared to change things. When Romano died in 2003, his obituary in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette consisted of a single line about his military career. World War II veteran, 8th Air Force. No mention of the lives he had saved, no reference to his invention that changed the course of the war, nor that a young sergeant, with few resources but immense determination, solved a problem no one else seemed willing to tackle. Because great innovations, like Romano's, do not come from long waits for approval. They come from those who refuse to wait for someone to give the green light. Romano's lesson is clear. Sometimes courage does not lie in following orders, but in knowing there is a moment when the rules are worth less than a human life. If this story touched you, leave a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us tell the moments that made history. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and stay with us for more incredible stories from the past.